Okay, so we're very lucky to have a group of people who have actually worked together thinking about large landscape conservation and regional conservation partnerships for a couple of years now. And I've had the chance to be with every single one of them, Jody accepted, in the field in the last couple of years. Jody, I'm especially interested to learn more. I owe you a trip. Okay, that's a promise. The idea here is that in New England, for example, there are these things called regional conservation partnerships. And the grand master of regional conservation partnerships is sitting right there, Bill Labick. He sort of invented this whole concept that is now spread throughout 6 New England states in a very dense way. The Lincoln Institute began a couple of years ago investing in the idea that that idea could be easily transferred to Canada. And so we partnered with the Center for Land Conservation, John Lowndes, and we have had the chance to work with Phil and Melanie on how this idea already has emerged in Canada and could become something greater both in the eastern townships and in southern Quebec and throughout Atlantic Canada, but cross borders as well. And that's where Phil Huffman comes in, because he's been working on a collaborative regional conservation partnership that's almost 20 years old now that crosses the US-Canadian border. So we have a group of people who are especially experienced in this field. And the first to talk is my friend John Lowndes, who has been helpful to this Congress in myriad ways. And I'm so glad to introduce you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You don't trip while you're up here, I guess. Thanks so much, Jim. I'm going to kind of set the table for the conversation here by talking a little bit about some work that the Center for Land Conservation is doing. Do I have to do something? I do. That, probably. There. Really, the idea behind regional partnerships and collaborations is building whole landscape conservation. It's working more broadly across the landscape. And there's only so much an individual organization can actually do. You need to think in a whole of society, whole landscape conservation and stewardship manner, integrate that landscape conservation. And the Center for Land Conservation is really gathering up and sharing experiences that have happened across Canada, comparing them to what has happened in the United States and elsewhere. And this is all part of an ongoing project of whole landscape, integrated landscape conservation in Canada. The center itself is recent, it's new, it's established in 2019, and it's modeled on experiences of several United States institutes. I like to call ourselves the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy without the endowment. That basically we're working on land conservation, but we're also having to raise the money to research, convene, do policy and program development. I think it was Greg Moore had a great statement about what you do, Jim, which is I think what we're trying to do is both, we're trying to set the table and also clear the dishes. So that's kind of what our role is in terms of...
traditional assigned role at home is to set the table and clear the dishes.
And other people will be doing all the other work of the good conservation and so on and so forth in between. So I'm formerly with the Nature Conservancy of Canada as the President and CEO. I'm in my rewirement phase now, working as Director of Business Development for the Center for Land Conservation. The focus area of the conversation that the Center is having is in southern Canada. For those of you not familiar with that, this line is not a real line. That doesn't exist. There's no fence or anything there. Statistics Canada sets this one up to show where mainly there's privately held land in Canada and where mainly there's not privately held land in Canada. While 60% of the land in the United States is privately owned, in Canada it's only 11%. The other is federal or provincial or Indigenous territory. And But there are parts of Canada that are really high, like Southern Ontario, which is at 95%. So that creates the difficulty. You can see why a focus on Southern Canada. If you look at species richness, this map pretty much mirrors the one you just saw. So where people live, work, and play in the country, you also have species at risk, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The whole idea behind the regional partnerships is how can they help with building whole landscape conservation from our perspective. It's a key ingredient, and here's several of the ways in which setting up regional partnerships and collaborations could be helpful with establishing buffers, wildlife corridors, active reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, building the organization's actual constituency, and also in sort of integrating with municipal and regional land use planning. So it's getting beyond what would be normally considered to be your grandmother's land trust and into other areas that work to engage in doing conservation across entire geographies. So we completed a review of U.S. experience. That QR code, if you take a picture of it, will take you to the Lincoln Institute, and where there's a report by Sarah Winterton, who's sitting right there if you need to ask more questions about it, called Building a Landscape Conservation Approach, which was completed last year. We're now working with on a pilot project with the Kawartha Land Trust east of Toronto to establish a regional conservation climate partnership. We're developing a platform to recognize and celebrate what landowners are doing above and beyond, not just IUCN countable lands, but all positive actions. We're looking at other partnership programs, the Partners in Conservation work that Kawartha Land Trust is doing, but also the Priority Places program that the Environment and Climate Change Canada has been doing. We're happy here to have Xin Ying here, who's with Environment and Climate Change Canada, if you have further questions about that particular program. We held a national workshop with practitioners. Several folks here attended that in June of 2024. We're looking to have another one of those in 2025. The study that Sarah did looked at 4 regional partnerships, from west to east, the Kootenai Conservation Program in British Columbia, the South of the Divide, one in Saskatchewan, which is the blue one on the map, Appalachian Corridor, that's not next. Rice Lake Plains Partnership in Ontario and the Appalachian Corridor in Quebec, and Melanie will be speaking more about that in a minute. You can look from the geographies from these photographs. They're quite different places across the country, and they've had different geneses. How do I say that? I don't even know how to use it. Where the Kootenai Conservation Program came together because a couple of funders got tired of trying to deal with 25 different groups and wanted them to work together. The Rice Lake Plains Partnership is more of a not so formal a partnership to compare and share information across the geography. South of the Divide Conservation Action Plan is looking at ways to help ranchers do better work and stewardship of their properties. And Appalachian Corridor, which Melanie will speak about, is a more formal arrangement that involves 22 land trusts, or 17 land trusts, yes, across the geography. So it's interesting that they grow from the ground up. They have different characteristics. I think that's fine. And they reflect what's needed in that particular geography to get more, better, faster conservation done. Just go through some of the work going on briefly. The Kawartha Land Trust pilot project. So Kawartha is just east of Toronto, northeast of Toronto. We're in Quebec City. That's just to orient people who are not from Canada where Kawartha is. It has a mix of cropland, privately held forests, government lands, and urban areas. It's a growing area population-wise, and that threatens the habitat within that particular geography. But they're building on existing partnerships that they have with the Williams Treaty First Nations and others. So we're going to take that information that they're pulling together to set up a regional conservation and climate partnership, and then begin to share that across the country. Building what we're calling a Partners in Conservation platform. how do we, thank you very much. How do we make it easier and more cost-effective for land trusts to talk to landowners? In other words, is there a way that we can actually capture the data that's out there from the various landowners and build on the work? And Court has done quite a bit of work where it would be actually helpful then to build a pipeline, basically, of future conservation work. So it wouldn't contribute today to the 30% goals or targets, but it's how to go beyond 30 by 30, and what are we doing after that, and how are you building the constituency for conservation that you need in your communities going forward. I mentioned the Environment and Climate Change Priority Places program. There's a lot of them across the country. This was a big program that was established. It's focused on species at risk, and the priority places were chosen where there were multiple species at risk across the country. There's been some major investments, but a big part of this particular program has been to work with the communities to establish these regional partnerships focused on how to improve conservation for those particular species in those geographies. It's a very complicated slide. We tried to hone this down a little bit. Basically, the partnerships, there's a current and a future one for each one of these. You can the basic takeaway is that the connections between the various groups that exist within those geographies have strengthened or changed and improved over the period of time of having the priority places partnership. And there's been a lot of success with the partnerships. They've delivered 35,000 hectares of secured conservation lands, and they've come to some takeaways in terms of the partnerships and how relationships are essential to the success of the work that needs to be done in those areas, that you need to have meaningful Indigenous engagement, and it takes a long-term commitment and a consistent commitment. And this transformation doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, hard work, and consistency over a time period. And I've got the priority places for species at risk. If you go to that particular site, you will learn way more about the work that's being done there. We still have challenges in building capacity. We need to get to a critical mass that sustains partnerships over time, and there are a few organizations or programs that really fill that niche for research and capacity building, and the need for programs to support sustainable core funding. So what we're looking at is some next steps. The Learning Exchange Initiative, as I said, we're going to host another national gathering, a bigger one in 2025, gathering more people together to share. We found just getting people together to share their experiences was, as what you folks do, Jim, an incredibly magical experience for a lot of people. Some people had never even been to Montreal from across the country. So it was quite energizing to bring everybody together. Looking at collaborating with Environment Climate Change Canada regarding the value and capacity of the approach and the framework, and how best to continue to share information, as well as support expansion and partnership in other regions. One of the things we're looking at is setting up mechanisms like local conservation funds. I've been speaking to our friends in Massachusetts who have a fantastic program. I think that's one area that's ripe in Canada. If we're going to encourage more local and regional conservation work, getting ways in which local community can invest in the work will be extremely important to the future. And thank you very much. All done.
At the beginning of the conference, I urged you all to be clear and concise. Well done. Thank you so much. Our next guest is Phil Huffman. Phil has a long career both at the Nature Conservancy and now at the Quebec Labrador Foundation, helping to both direct and now support the Staying Connected initiative, which crosses both in New York State and mostly in the Green Mountains in Vermont, across the border into Quebec, and he's really looked at the data very carefully and sees essential things that need to get done to support biodiversity over the coming centuries. So Phil, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour. I want to just start by saying shout out thank you to Jim and the whole Lincoln Institute team and to the broader swath of folks who have pulled this amazing gathering together. It is really powerful to be a part of, and the magic is happening, the learning is happening, the connections are happening in all kinds of big ways. So I'm honored to be a part of that. Thank you. As Jim said, I'm here. I work for a small nonprofit organization called the Quebec Labrador Foundation that I'll say something more about in a minute. But I'm really here today talking about this big binational partnership that's focused on landscape connectivity called the Staying Connected Initiative that I've been involved in since it got started about 15 years ago. And I want to say my appreciation and also hopefully not condolences for those of you who have heard me give this presentation in recent days. So thanks for, if you feel the need to get up and do something else, I understand. At any rate, it's work that I've been involved in for really since the beginning of the Staying Connected Initiative partnership, and that I think offers a lot of good things happening in this region, but also maybe some ideas for other places. And one way to think about the Staying Connected Initiative is as this sort of coordinated network of regional conservation partnerships. So the SCI is the acronym, is almost like a meta RCP, one layer up with a number of other smaller RCPs like Appalachian Corridor that Melanie leads and we'll hear more about in a moment, nested within that. So just a quick minute on the Quebec Labrador Foundation. Can I just ask how many people are familiar with QLF or have heard about it before today? Okay, so about half, that's great. So we're a small binational US-Canadian NGO. We've been working in Eastern Canada and New England for more than 60 years on initially community service and then conservation of natural and cultural heritage at a variety of different scales. And we've taken that work global over the last 4 decades or so through exchanges and whatnot. And make sure I'm going in the right direction. Yeah, this gives you a little bit more of an illustration. So we do continue to do some work at the very ground, on the ground community scale in parts of Eastern Canada, this big regional scale transborder work that I'll be speaking more about. And that I'm so pleased to have been able to bring QLF into the fold of for the Staying Connected Initiative, and then a bunch of global work. And my colleague Brent Mitchell, one of our senior vice presidents, is deeply involved in world leadership on 30 by 30 private protected areas, approaches like that I think resonate so strongly with what we're doing here. Okay, so the Staying Connected Initiative, if you haven't heard about it before, is a big transboundary partnership of government entities at the federal, provincial, state, and sub-jurisdictional levels, a whole host of NGOs of various shapes and sizes and focus, academic institutions, and others that are working across borders in with sort of a core focus on the geography that you see highlighted here that I'll say more about in a moment, but across borders to sustain and enhance connectivity for all living beings. And actually, we've been talking about it as ecological connectivity, but as we're learning from our Indigenous colleagues and friends, it's really about biocultural connectivity. So the idea is trying to blur borders and boundaries as much as we can, and not just the socio-political and geographic ones, but also the cultural borders, the institutional borders, the sectoral borders, trying to just work together. It's this sort of whole of society approach that John touched on a minute ago. We do this at multiple scales because that's crucial, and that this region, which in Western scientific terms is known as the Northern Appalachian Acadian ecoregion, or it's largely overlaps the footprint of the Wabanaki Confederacy in Indigenous territorial terms, is part of a much bigger whole that I'll speak about. I encourage you to take a look at the website for Staying Connected if you're interested in more, and also just come find me. So I want to just set the stage a little bit for this region. Who in here isn't from northeastern North America? Anyone? A few. Okay. Well, and so this may be illuminating even for those of you who are from this region. This is a map courtesy of the Nature Conservancy that shows the global extent of temperate mixed forest pre-colonization. So say 500 years ago, something like that, widespread at this latitude in the northern and southern hemisphere. That's about what's left. So you can see a dramatic decrease in this forest type that's really important for biodiversity, but also as a carbon sink and for a whole bunch of social values as the home for millennia for people, but all sorts of other beings, a wide array of diversity. You can see the region where we are highlighted in red, at least a chunk of it highlighted in red there. So dramatic decrease, and it illustrates how this region is globally significant as one of the last remaining strongholds of this forest type in the world. Another schematic that illustrates the continental scale significance of this region, again, courtesy of the Nature Conservancy. This is the sort of generalized anticipated movement of various species of animals, mammals, birds, and amphibians in response to climate change. And you can see how the whole Appalachian mountain range corridor is a critical pathway for the movement of species up the eastern seaboard of North America in the face of climate change, and how this region that's circled in red is a critical destination for species as they're moving north up the Appalachians, but also it's a critical gateway to areas beyond, further north. And so to enable that, it's really critical to have a well-connected landscape. If the landscape is badly fragmented, that movement gets interrupted, can't happen. So now diving into staying connected, the origins of this go back to some great work, visionary regional scale transborder work that was done in the late 90s and early 2000s under the umbrella of a consortium called Two Countries, One Forest, which maybe I know some of you at least are familiar with. And as part of that, they were developing a sort of holistic conservation vision for the Northern Appalachian Acadian ecoregion. As part of that, connections between the large forest blocks was highlighted as one critical piece, and so that sort of spawned the birth of Staying Connected. And in the time since, this was back in 2008, 2009, SCI was born and identified a bunch of critical focal areas or linkage areas at the regional scale that are particularly important for attention, and that within that there's this sort of idea of nested scales of regional partnerships focused on those colored polygons, one of which Melanie will be zeroing in on shortly. So it's again this network of RCPs at different scales. SCI uses what I think is a pretty innovative approach that brings together a whole host of different strategies. It starts with conservation science to inform where we make conservation investments, and tried and true tools like land protection and land stewardship, but also bringing in different things of working on how to minimize the fragmenting effect of roads, for instance, on the landscape and as a barrier to wildlife movement, engaging with local communities on land use planning and how the landscape fits within the overall importance of their sense of place and their community vitality. A whole bunch of other ones as well. I'm moving quickly just because of time, so forgive me for blurring past. This slide illustrates at least one example of how these strategies come together, where you've got a busy road that can be a barrier for wildlife. There's a culvert there. The New York State Department of Transportation put in a wildlife shelf to enable movement of species that don't want to get their feet wet and to go under the road rather than over it. And the land on both sides has been protected so that it's not a culvert bridge to nowhere. Doing this work, bringing together all these different strategies, doing it at multiple scales, from parcel specific to community to linkage or pinch point to transboundary, is way beyond what any one organization can do. So SCI brings together this vast partnership of organizations, again, across the different categories that I touched on earlier. This is a partial capture of the breadth of the SCI partnership across the region. There are hundreds, I would say, of entities of various sorts that are involved in this effort. And I just want to highlight two other things quickly. One of the roles of SCI at a regional scale is to help with convening, bringing people together, gatherings similar to this one, actually, but from within the region and beyond. And we held in June in Montreal the first ever transboundary summit on connectivity for all of northeastern North America. So for the 6 New England states and New York, and even a little south of there, the 5 easternmost Canadian provinces, and even west into Ontario, because it's all connected. Several of you who are here were with us in Montreal. Is an incredibly powerful gathering that I think is a sort of a pivot point and a launch point for really elevating and ramping up this work and broadening it to be a much more inclusive effort and holistic going forward. I could spend all day talking about this, but I won't. And then lastly, I just want to touch on the policy dimension, another of the strategies that I didn't speak to before, but there's a recognition that policy at various levels of government, from global to national to provincial and state, and even below that, is critical either as an enabler of the kind of work that we're all trying to do, or it can be an obstacle. And so the Staying Connected Initiative Partnership engages in policy thinking and development, and some partners in advocacy for governmental policy changes at different levels. And the most notable part of that, I would say, is that in 2016, the partnership was instrumental in getting the New England governors and the Eastern Canadian premiers, which is an established regional annual collaborative among the top governmental leaders from the region, working on transborder issues of regional significance, to adopt a resolution on connectivity. I encourage you to go look for it. There's a lot of great substance in there. If you just Google NEG-ECP Resolution 40-3, it will come up and give you the details. Much to our delight, they had just a month ago adopted a new resolution on connectivity that basically, and it's a whole new batch of governors and premiers than were in office back in 2016. So this current set of leaders has adopted a new resolution affirming the importance of connectivity for all beings in this region, and the importance of working within their jurisdictions and across borders to try to make headway on this and enhancing the connected landscape for all beings. I'm going to transition now and hand this off to my dear colleague and friend, Melanie Lelievre, who leads Appalachian Corridor. Her organization is focused on the Canadian side of the Northern Green Mountain linkage, so it's the one that's circled in red on the map on the left and that's all in green in the map on the right. And she will provide a deep dive into what this really looks like, this work on the ground. And as I segue out, here's contact information for me. SCI has a regional coordinator, Michael Seaton, who's a Nature Conservancy employee, but who works on behalf of the partnership. Wealth of information. I encourage you to reach out if you have questions and come find me over the rest of our time together. Thanks very much.
Usual thing to do to start with. Hi everyone. Really honored to be here. Thank you very much, Jim, and all the team of ILCN for this great invitation. Really happy to be part of it with this incredible group of competent person. Really inspiring. So I'll do my little part in this all regional presentation. So here we go. No, just before I started. So I'll highlight, my objective with you today is really highlight what are the key elements that explain what's going on in the Quebec side of the Green Mountains. It's commonly referred as one of a really succeeding initiative in conservation on private land in southern Quebec, and I'll try to highlight the key specifics of it. So this is a picture of our team. We're a staff-based organization. We've been founded in 2002. Our mission is really to consolidate and leave as a legacy a vast corridor of protected area. So a great team of passionate people, biologists, cartographer, coordinator in different aspects. So we're 23 staff person. It has grown quite significantly every year. And so as Phil set the stage for me before, so this is where we are, where we work, not that far from here. You understand it's in the Northern App, and this is the incredible picture of the natural area, the Green Mountains. So amazing place with nice mountains, nice forest cover, big lakes, a lot of biodiversity, and then an incredible community that is really attached to the landscape and the forest. Just again, very briefly, we do regular things conservation organization do, or we do protection project, land stewardship, science and awareness and education. So we move mountains with some of our projects. We love the difficult projects, the ones that are, sometimes difficult and have a lot of challenges. This is an example, Mount Foster. We almost went there Monday, but the weather was not with us. There was a study tour before the Congress. We also invite people on our properties because it's a very good way to increase support to what we're doing and helping people connect with nature. And I would saying mainly resume what we're doing. Our objective is really bringing people together within those projects and be sure that all stakeholders in the community have benefits from those projects. So I don't have to go this since Phil really put the stage, very, very critical area within the global ecoregion. So we work on this little part of the territory. So this map, I know there's a lot of information on it. It's just to highlight that we're based on science. We have this conservation strategy. We look at forest core, natural corridors, and this is where we focus our energy for land protection to have the highest impact. And in red and blue, this is the protected area, and je vais y revenir. I'll come back on this a little bit later. No need to discuss about this. So I want to go into I'll take a couple of minutes talking about the way we work with our local partner, the affiliate members, because this is a very specific, kind of a unique way to work with our local partners, and this is one of the key elements success in our initiative. So we work closely with 17 local organization and which work in different sectors of our larger territory, and as well we work very closely with our national partner NCC. So the particularities of this relationship is that it's really a synergistic relationship. So it's not just that we do some project together. We're tied, we're bond. So our affiliate members, they really work at the local level, like Mount Pinnacle, sector, Ruder Valley, so very, very local. They're mainly driven by volunteers, except few exceptions. They're all volunteer based. And they have this amazing capacity to initiate projects because they're very close from their neighborhood. They know the people, they see, they hear what's going on, and they know everybody. While what we bring in the portrait is we have this broader vision, the regional scale vision. We bring in all the expertise, the team of professionals, so biologists, GIS, people that are familiar with all the administrative. We fund the project, we do the legal, and all the things that is complicated with conservation. You all know this. And we manage the project. So together, we decide commonly which project we will conduct based on the strategy, the local strategy, and the contact, the people they know that would be interested and willing, and together we do those projects. So this situation makes that they stays on their X, and we are on our, can we say this? We're on our X. And so they keep vibrant their energy for having new projects, and they stay at this really energetic level where they can initiate a new project, and we bring in and we do all the complicated things and boring thing. 5 minutes. Okay. Maybe I'll take 1 extra minute. Jim told me it was okay. We also have been designated as a priority place within the program of the federal government. So we brought in even more partners in this initiative, different type of stakeholders and organization. You can see a couple of them. One of them is here in the person of Joachim, who works with the Fondation Cette. So a lot of people, a lot of organization to have a biggest higher impact on species at risk and for conservation. So an image worth 1,000 words? Yeah, this is what we say?
An image is worth 1,000 words.
Okay, you got it. So just a couple of images. This is the situation in year 2000 when the idea of Appalachian corridor came in. So in red, only 400 hectares, private, protected. And at that moment, there were only 4 local conservation organizations working in this incredible area. And in blue, it's the private, public protected area. So you can see how it has evolved 5 years later, 2010, 2015, 2020, and now today. So this is, it's getting very well. It's the area in Quebec where we have the highest concentration of conservation organizations working together and the highest concentration of projects concluded on private land. So this results doesn't belong just to us. We're just a little part of all this. It's with all our partners, the local interest, NCC, and some municipality as well. So, but we're really proud that today, close to 17,000 hectares are protected on private land, and when we add the protection on public land, it's 9% of the land that is now protected, which is, there's still a lot of work, but we're progressing. Yeah. So a little word on little bit of time, energy. Sorry. Yeah. A word on one of our big project, one of our signature project is trying to make this barrier, Highway 10, more permeable to wildlife, because it's a real major that spans the territory in 2 halves. And that has to do with road ecology. We've started to work on this project 10 years ago with the government of Quebec, Transportation Department, and 2 years ago we've launched a global plan for Highway 10 where we highlight priority areas where they should invest for crossing structures and to increase connectivity, because we've invested a lot in protection, but there is this obstacle. So this is a picture of one of the crossing structures that was put in place, and this picture was taken like 5 days after the structure was finished, where he's thanking us and smiling. He's really happy. So yeah, this is one of our dream we have. So we work very closely with the now with the transportation department. We have this nice collaboration, and every time they're planning for a repair in a sector, when it's in one of those priority area, so they discuss with us and we make recommendation. So, and that all this road ecology approach was really approfondi by this within this expertise group of Staying Connected initiative. I'm on my way. This is my last slide, except for the tank one. So this, as you can, this is a picture of a situation with the protected area in 2005 on the first one, and now today. So when we started, there was almost nothing on the Canadian side of the Green Mountains, and the situation in US really acted as a catalyst for us. We wanted to have similar results on our side of the border, and we're proud today that we're getting a little bit there. It's good. It's good. So just as a kind of a conclusion, just a reminder that the main determinants for us and things that explain the success that is ongoing in the Green Mountains, except for sure of the quality and the ecological importance of the territory, is, I would say, this vision at the landscape level. You have to take into account that 25 years ago in Quebec, no such initiative at this scale was in place, so it was quite innovative. And with this perspective of connectivity and corridors, it proves to be extremely relevant today when we realize how much climate change has driven things and having impact on wildlife. Another element is our governance model with local land trusts, as I highlighted. So it's really like a codependent situation. We need them, they need us. And as I heard this morning, I love this expression. I'll call it now a radical partnership with them. And as was going on in US, really act as a catalyst. The group of expertise and peer sharing within the incredible network of SCI gave us the confidence to address a project like working on Highway 10 with the government of Quebec. So that's about it. I think I finished with this. Thank you.
So, I'm just going to slow this down a little bit. You've had 3 people working at hyperspeed to give you the story. What I want to tell you is that we saw this at work in the field. There was a field trip that happened, a study tour that happened before the conference, and about 30 of us got to go to Bromont in southern Quebec and see how many hectares was that property? 150 hectares? Yeah, the one that we saw.
Yeah, 34 hectares.
34 hectares, not a huge thing, but it connected several pieces of property that were critical to protecting this community from hyperdevelopment. And the mayor of Bromont and the committee that saved this property came out, and they basically confirmed what we already knew, is that Melanie is a rock star. She and her group mobilized local people to take a development that had already been approved. And because the people understood the importance of connectivity for open space, they were able to protect it and raise $500,000 to do that. Is that the right number? It was really an amazing thing, and so it got the award for the acquisition of the year in the province of Quebec. So it had snowed the day before. It was kind of sprinkling. We were all cold, and we wouldn't move from that spot because it was so exciting to see how much enthusiasm all those people had. Now, we're going to make a leap to the West Coast, and there's actually a logic in all of this that many of us learned 20 years ago from a guy named Ted Smith, who said that he wanted to protect the shoulders of the continent. He wanted a corridor on the West Coast that extended from Yellowstone to Yukon, and he wanted one in the East Coast that crossed the US-Canadian border in Vermont all the way into Quebec, and that would be a model for the rest of the world. And what I'm here to tell you is that with the hard work of these people and people like Bill Labick in New England, that actually is beginning to happen in a way that's very significant and very rare in the rest of the world. I also want to add that one of the things that Melanie sped through that's really important to understand is that in both of these initiatives, they understood the critical importance of road crossings. You can protect a lot of land along a big corridor, but if that land is broken by superhighways that don't let animals migrate across their range, then it's much less important biologically than it would be otherwise. And so Jody Hilty, who is the president of the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative, is the new name of it, who has been at this work for quite a while, is here to share with us their experience doing a very similar thing on the West Coast with a gigantic collaborative. And then Jeremy Guth is going to explain his incredible passion, really, for the right kind of road crossings. Jeremy, I think, is the most powerful advocate for road crossings that I have ever met in my entire life. So, Jody, let me let you start. Then we'll
All right, everybody stand up while I get over there. Stand up,
Stand up.
come on. It's post-lunch, shake it out, or whatever you need to do. Close your eyes and think about, why are you here? Close your eyes. Why are you here? Just what's your one reason? Okay, and then sit down. Awesome, thanks. Just had to wake you up a little bit. So thank you and for your whole team for having us here. Thank you all for being here. You know, I come from a, wow, this looks really different than what I created, but we'll get there, we'll get there. I'm inherently optimistic. And I want you to know that I'm sharing an idea of optimism, and I've heard a lot of optimism. I was over in Global Finance today, and they said something that rings true for the Y2Y region, for many other similar regions in the world, and that is that conservation is accelerating, and the tools to do conservation are accelerating. Are we out of the so-called woods yet? No, but it is a landscape and a seascape of hope. So let's talk about the Y2Y region. I'm going to introduce you to the region and a little bit of the history, and then I'm going to talk about what are the ingredients that actually move conservation forward. Okay, so before I even go, does anybody know the name of this bear? Think Jackson Hole? It doesn't matter. It's a number. But what's most important here is that this bear is also ultra productive. She's about 25 years old this year. When she was 22, she had 4 cubs. Nobody has 4 cubs, and they all survived. So this is about increasing productivity. She also has about 24 kids and grandkids in that landscape. So some people, you all in this room, can be more productive and transformative in the world. So let's go to just a little bit of the history of the Yellowstone to Yukon region. In the early 90s, science completely changed. We were able to put a satellite collar, the precursor to GPS collars, on a wolf called Pluie. And she took this 100,000 square kilometer jaunt across 2 countries, 2 provinces, 3 states, and 30 different jurisdictions, from private lands to national parks to provinces to Native American reservations and many more places. The conservation community, the scientists, were just stunned on both sides of the border. What did she show us? She showed us that while protected areas are important, they are insufficient, and that we actually, if we want to conserve animals like her, that we have to do conservation at the scale that nature needs. And this was sort of one of the genesis stories of the Yellowstone to Yukon vision. This is another part of that story, which is the history of the diminishment of large hoofed animals, large carnivores in the landscape. You can see historically the hotter or redder colors are where there were more animals, and how in some areas they actually disappeared from landscapes, and really one of the last places where these animals still survive is in the Yellowstone to Yukon region. And in fact, we just wrote a paper this last year comparing the largest landscape in every continent to the Y2Y region. And in fact, the Y2Y region is the wildest region. I hope that's not the case forever, because I want to see rewilding across many of these landscapes like we're hearing about today. One of the things that was also really important, even at the founding, was a recognition that Y2Y is a north-south mountain range, and that animals can both go that direction, but also to different slopes and aspects in order to adjust to climate change. And then what Y2Y and our many partners are doing, protected areas, increasing protected areas, connectivity, reducing stressors, that is also helping to create climate change adaptation. And it's a huge region, right? Not only are there 2 countries, but there's 75 indigenous territories that the Y2Y region crosses. It is about busting those boundaries. It's about working across all of those jurisdictions and thinking about what, at a very fine scale, matters at this large landscape scale. So we've been at it. This is actually what's been happening over the last 30 years now. We're just finishing our 30th year. So we've increased protected areas phenomenally. The size of protected areas is bigger. We can't even keep in print how many wildlife overpasses there are, and this doesn't count the 47 that we just realized are in planning stages. It is really exciting. Some critters like grizzly bears and even bison are seeing some recovery in this landscape. So it is a landscape of promise. But how does it move? And I will say that one of the things that we looked at in one of our papers was, did protected areas across North America have the same rate of increase? And in fact, we think that the Y2Y vision is the reason why protected areas in this region are increased at double the rate that they did across the rest of North America. It's the power of vision. It's also the power of working together. Okay, so how does this happen? There's a couple of key ingredients. One is having the vision, right? The Yellowstone to Yukon vision of connecting and protecting these lands so that people and nature can thrive. But fundamentally, it's about what is the best use of this landscape over the long term? Nature, right? It's resetting a cultural connection that some cultures have had for a long time and others have lost touch with. It's also about science and knowledge. We heard last night about two-eyed seeing, and this particular paper, the Canadian Mountain Assessment, which was written by led by Graham McDowell, who's a conservation scientist with Y2Y, is, I think, the gold standard for how to integrate respectfully Indigenous knowledges with Western science. So take a look at this sometime. Every chapter is co-authored by multiple Indigenous people, multiple Western people. All the stories remain in video. They didn't try to capture them in text, and those videos remain under the ownership of the elders that told those stories. It's really quite cool. So we have to have that knowledge to move things forward. And it takes a huge community to make conservation move. So make no mistake, Y2Y, the conservation initiative that I lead, is about herding cats. I mean, people. Really our job is to facilitate everybody else to get work done. We will work with anybody who we can find a shared vision with. That could be companies, governments, nonprofits, volunteers, and others. And ultimately what happens, of course, so on the left-hand side, here's the increase of protected areas over the first 25 years. And on the right side are the visions of 19 different Indigenous communities of new Indigenous-led protected areas. These are really exciting. We would get well beyond 30% if all of them were designated. Our biggest challenge now is resources, and we're working on that. Different conversation over in global conservation finance. I want to just pause for a minute and recognize that Clinsasa Park, which is in the narrowest part of the Wide region in eastern British Columbia, was increased by 75 times because of the West Moberly and Saulteaux First Nation, plus all of so that area is the green stipple. The rest of the colors are all moratoriums on different kind of industrial development that they intend to keep forever. So that's another 500,000 acres that won't see development. These are important steps forward and require partnerships. So we talked a little bit about roads. I love this photo. It's of Lingenpolter and the 44 times that bear bumped off of Interstate 90, the impenetrable wall of Y2Y in Montana. This is the reason why we're seeing the normalization of safe wildlife passage even in states like Montana. They are now doing a study on where they should put wildlife crossing structures on I-90, and I believe that it's largely because of one bear in this image. Likewise, we can go across to Alberta. Alberta has not only the most well-studied set of wildlife crossing structures in Banff, but it also came out with a map. Actually, when I was at your Connectivity Summit, we're all looking at our phones and we get this map emailed to us by a longtime colleague in Alberta Department of Transportation. We were like, is this for real? And he said, yeah. Are you gonna advertise the about 40 wildlife crossing structures that you've committed to? He's like, no, could you do that for us? So we put out their press release. That is moving towards normalization of safe wildlife passage. It's super exciting. And of course, we talked a little bit about the private lands piece, right? This is about getting wildlife in our system really between protected areas. So protected areas tend to be in mountains, high elevation. These valley bottoms are low elevation areas that are really important for wildlife to be able to get across. So sometimes there's roads, sometimes there's not, but sometimes they're sort of measly little properties, but they're the only way that you're gonna see grizzly bears or wolverines or other critters get from one mountain area to the other. So our job is working with 27 different land trusts to identify those critical pieces of private land that matter at the Y2Y scale, right? And what we're able to bring to it also is funding that a local land trust could never get because it's in the context of a bigger vision. So we can bring additional resources in and help them to participate in a much bigger cohesive vision within the context of where they operate. So I'll wrap up here just to say that in the Y2Y region, I hope you've gotten a picture that we're really optimistic. We are increasing the speed at which we do some of these things that I talked about, like protected areas, like ecological corridors and increasing connectivity. There are definitely challenges that I didn't get to talk about. We didn't talk at all about the policy arena or community nature positive work, but you can ask me about that in the halls. So thank you very much.
Okay, if you have never met Jeremy Guth, here you go.
Oh my God, Jim, that's the best introduction I've ever received. Thank you. Okay, I'm batting cleanup after an extraordinary group on this panel, so I'm not going to try and compete. I'm just going to add complexity, but it's a good sort of a complexity. It's something that I think will, add to the connectivity that we're all talking about, and it'll also frame the concept, that is the concept of large landscape conservation writ large, as a general thing to a much broader and diverse audience. So I'm Jeremy Guth, and I'm going to talk, and I'm the, one of the founding partners of ARC Solutions, and I'm going to talk about wildlife crossings. So today we're experiencing the best of times and the worst of times for biodiversity. On the bad side, we're facing the 6th greatest extinction event in the history of life on Earth, and on the good side, we're becoming painfully aware of this, and at least committing to do something about it at the appropriate scale. Currently, that response is the CBD's Global Biodiversity Framework, targeting, among other things, that 30% of the world's lands will be protected by 2030. Moving on. The fine print requires that we do so, among other things, in a well-connected manner, which is as much a challenge on the infrastructural level as it is on the sheer scale of the landscape. So looking at the world from the 30 by 30 perspective and thinking about it in the terms of large landscape conservation, you can see in this map from Richard Weller's World Park out of University of Pennsylvania's School of Design, some really exciting concepts for how you could create conservation at scale in a connected way around the world. And then you can see the Yellowstone to Yukon there. You can see staying connected in the Appalachian corridors, as well as many others that are crossing the various continents around the world. However, in this slide, you can see that connectivity means different things for different species. So you have on the left an extremely well-connected world for one species, and that same world on the right, utterly fragmented for the rest of life. Roads are the largest infrastructural barrier. I think I missed one, didn't I? Damn, had a good slide I lost. Roads are the largest infrastructural barrier artifact in the globe. We're talking about a 64 million kilometer network that's spread across all the landscapes with an ever-tightening grip, and that network is growing rapidly. As this slide shows you, we're looking from, according to The Guardian, at a 60% increase on that 64 million in the next 25 years. So how can wildlife move safely as this net gets even bigger and tighter? And if we can't move, how are we going to adapt, how are they going to adapt their annual and lifetime requirements for habitat to fragments that can sometimes be less than a 1 square kilometer? How are they going to adapt to changes such as that other anthropocentric effect of global proportions, climate change? There's a slide I was looking for. Anyway, that to me is a really powerful slide of the state of roads, and it's a bit of a sobering counterpoint to the one I showed you of the large landscape initiatives across the world. So, trying to get more cheerful now, wildlife crossings basically work, as this picture demonstrates. We can change, actually. We can change how we build and manage our transportation systems. And the wildlife crossing systems that ARC and many others are developing are shown tremendous promise. Here in this graphic we produced with the Center for Large Landscape Conservation, we highlight how effective they are reducing wildlife vehicle collisions, or WVCs, by 86 to 97%. My involvement with wildlife crossings began in the Rocky Mountains of Western Canada, where Parks Canada has built and tested the largest system in the world, a system that has proven both effective in the reduction of WVCs and the facilitation of movement for all the resident and migratory species at a population scale. As a pioneer funder and an entrepreneur for large landscape protection since 2003, I began by ensuring that the park's principal investigator for the crossings, Tony Clevenger, and his team had funding for 17 years of research and monitoring of this system. They have since compiled the largest repository of data for wildlife crossing systems anywhere in the world, and they have the proof that they work. So, crossings basically and essentially work, as this picture demonstrates. But Tony and I believe they could do far more, and that there was a role for them beyond their functionality as a powerful communicator for connectivity. So we believe we could do better than this. So what is ARC, and what does it bring to wildlife crossings? It brings design to the mix. ARC began as a design competition for a better structure and landscape for its wild clients. To do so, it integrated science with design, and it looked outward to the human audience to raise awareness and better reconcile both human and wildlife mobility. Here you can see from our logos and the partnership that ARC is a collaboration and one that integrates some partners you might not expect in your typical large landscape initiative. There's the US Federal Highway Administration, for example, landscape design firms, architectural and engineering schools. Design thinking is a unique visual approach to challenges, examining them from multiple angles and creatively synthesizing materials and methods into new solutions and new thinking. The approach can be extended beyond buildings and widgets into more seemingly abstract problems, such as increasing the productivity of independent farmers in Myanmar, or better access to education in Zimbabwe, or for that matter, to better wildlife overpasses. Here from the international competition that we sponsored at ARC are 5 very different but all very practical and inspiring finalists. The winner on the left, Hypernature, by HNTB MVVA, is both beautiful and incredibly practical design of modular, snap-together components that are cast off-site for fast installation with a minimum of disturbance. It can be easily expanded or adapted as wildlife movement or habitats change. In aggregate, the ARC competition inspired new thinking, new methods, new materials, and new solutions for wildlife crossing systems. The solutions that ARC Solutions Partnership Network has promoted since the competition to the world these are solutions, that we've been promoting to the world ever since the competition 10 years ago, and the world is paying attention. As you can see, we were well covered during the competition by the New York Times, by Fast Company, and even on a scholarly level by Frontiers in Ecology. And these are just samples of the coverage that we've had after the competition and going forward from there. However, the bad news is from the competition is that there's the Hypernature design on the top left. That was never built. The site, the I-70 Westvale Pass in Colorado, was never mitigated, certainly not mitigated by an extraordinary overpass such as this. Colorado demanded that it be a public-private partnership, and we were at the stage of trying to raise the private part of the funding when statewide flooding struck in 2013. And the Colorado put the project on hold, indefinite hold, and it remains on hold to this day. However, an opportunity arose in California on the bottom right, and ARC partners, including 2 of the principals from the original competition, jumped on it. That's their overhead design for a crossing on the 101 in Southern California, and that is real. Oh, sure. This will be the largest wildlife overpass anywhere in the world, spanning 11 lanes of traffic. Here you can see the design renderings of the landscape architect from the landscape architect, and it's come a long way in the identification of client species. In Southern California, that's everything from mountain lions to harvester ants. And the sophistication of the design considerations have considerably advanced as well. I'd like to point out to everybody who's with a land trust here to pay attention to location consideration, because that I want to come back to. And here I'll go. So what's this slide got to do with wildlife crossings and large landscape conservation? Well, besides being a great image from the artist David Blackwood, it's a visual allegory for the relationship between private land conservation and wildlife crossings. We're both the same iceberg, and one of them is the tip. So which one is it? So what does this landscape, beautiful as it is, tell you about landscape connectivity compared to this one? If you're like me and you agree with me, you'd see that the second one is more compelling. And not only does it use the incredible visibility of its beautiful design, but it reaches an audience passing underneath it at the rate of 300,000 cars a day. Overpasses can grow awareness and support for all the partners in connectivity, including private land conservation, from a public whose only experience with wildlife might be what they encounter on the road. The location consideration in the design decision slide I wanted you to note recognizes that in stating the crossings will connect protected land on either side of the highway. Land that was protected by private effort starting 30 years ago made the wildlife crossing at Liberty Canyon possible. Without it, it would never have happened. And it's extraordinary to think that the people who did that work, did not conceive that there would be a wildlife crossing while they were doing it. And you can expand on that. I mean, as we touched on earlier, there's the extraordinary announcement from Alberta Transport. In this one, I'm specifically highlighting Highway 3, which does have an overpass, as well as other structures designated for it. And there's Highway 3 in Y2Y, a critical pinch point in the 3,400 kilometer Y2Y landscape. Moving to Appalachians that we've just talked about, you can see Melanie's Dream Bridge, and you can see another structure proposed further down in New York State on Highway 87, just south of Albany, both of which will critically contribute to the effectiveness of these larger landscape visions. Crossing sites can add depth to the awareness and the support by travelers who see them at interpretive centers and creative and see them through creative signage. They can be living laboratories for the health of our connected landscapes. Data can be collected by citizen scientists, and that data, such as images from movement cameras, can be used to help rebuild a desperately needed kinship between people and their fellow wild travelers on the landscape. Finally, none of our success at ARC, not least of all with the Annenberg Crossing, would have happened without collaboration, both from our network and without. Here from our Annenberg workshop are members of the National Park Service, Sheikh Moeddin on the right, who's the Caltrans project manager and chief engineer, Robert Rock, the principal landscape architect, and both Carol Lacey from TNC California and Senator Fran Pavley, who, when she isn't drafting policy like the low emissions vehicle greenhouse gas program for the state of California, was leading local land trust activity to ensure there'd be secure approaches on either side of the 101 freeway. So in conclusion, I'd say that for a resilient world, one of the key relationships to build is one between wildlife crossing infrastructure and private land conservation communities. Outside the boundaries of park and other public lands, neither can succeed without the other, and arguably they complete each other as a new integrated class of green infrastructure for the protection of biodiversity. Together, we can restore a shattered world. Thank you.
So I think the conclusion, and we'll take a couple of questions after this, is that protecting land is great. Connecting protected land is greater. It's something that we've got to do, and I appreciate the presentations that everybody's made here to get us to that point where we have to connect physically and we have to connect socially, working with each other across sectors, across the public, private, nonprofit, academic sectors, and with Indigenous communities to get the job done. So let me open it for questions. No one dares. After that, that was a speed trip through regional conservation partnerships. Bill, you've got to have one. I just know it. And we should use our microphone on the table to answer.
Yeah, so this is Bill Labick with Cette Foundation. So great presentations all around. Jody, when you were done, I was thinking, what would keep us on the East Coast doing what you're doing? I mean, not just you, obviously, but the Yellowstone to Yukon initiative. It seems like there are things that you're doing, work that you're doing, that it feels to me like we could apply to the East Coast. Right now, there's a lot of work being done in the Appalachian landscape, but there's not one vision. There's a lot of visions and a lot of groups. I've talked to, Phil, I know I've talked to you about this, but there's the potential for having one vision and everyone getting behind it, but I'm just wondering if you have some advice for the East Coast, the Appalachian landscape.
Thank you, and I do wish that Ted Smith, who was one of the many people who really started off Y2Y with funding and also started off the Two Countries, One Forest, or the Northern Appalachian work, to also answer this question. I do think that one of the fundamental differences is that we went from being a collaborative of conservationists and scientists that were dispersed and all kind of had our own interests in the Y2Y region, to realizing that there needed to be an international entity that would be sort of the keepers of that larger landscape. And my observation, and again, I'm very far away from this landscape, but over the years, it seems like what's happened is there's been uneven funding, and so the funding gets focused in one region or another region, and I think that the only way that can be resolved is with an entity that actually makes sure that there's if there's restricted funding, there's also unrestricted funding that can get to areas that are beyond and that are really maintaining that larger vision despite these sort of sub-projects happening. And I just wonder, I mean, I'd be really curious from you all whether you think that that would be helpful.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Bill and Jody, for your insights. I think it's, yeah, no, I feel like it's a work in progress here, I guess, and that, you know, those of us who've been involved with the Staying Connected initiative since the early days, 15 years or so ago, coming out of the great visionary work of Two Countries, One Forest, have always looked to Y2Y as like our older cousin. And that we have learned a lot and been inspired by what Y2Y has been able to do. And I think that we're still trying to figure it out in some ways. And that unlike, you know, in Y2Y, the organization is an NGO, and that is the carrier, the keeper of the big vision that encompasses a whole suite of hundreds of partners. Here, SCI is a partnership without a central organization. The Nature Conservancy, as I mentioned, is sort of the fiscal and administrative home, but there isn't a single NGO that's sort of that is the keeper of that vision. So it's more diffuse. And then, you know, Bill, as we've talked about, as you and others in the room know, that the Northern Apps is nested within the broader picture of the Appalachians as a whole, and there are lots of overlapping larger scale visions that it ties in with. So I don't know, I'm not really answering the question, I'm more just processing out loud, I think, on this, of trying to figure out, you know, how we'll carry it forward. I think the trick with it, whatever the structure is, I think the trick is how to optimize our effectiveness for collective action. That's what it really is all, you know, it all comes down to. We need everybody, you know, rowing in the same direction, and each entity doing it in its own way, but under this shared umbrella of where we're trying to get to. How best to accomplish that structurally is an open question, and I'd love to kick it around more. I don't know. Others want to?
I think I'm obliged to, for now, end this discussion because you have a break coming up and then the last session for today. Melanie, do you want to add something to that? No.
I don't have that much to add.
Okay, all right. But you have a little bit.
I'll finish
Yeah.
my idea. But it was just like, I think we're getting in that direction. And what my previous
No
colleagues
question.
just said, I'm adding on this. And with the recent recognition by TNC and Wildlands Network that the Appalachia are among one of the highest priority on earth to protect, I think we're going there. So we have model, we have energy, we have nice projects. So I really think I'm optimistic as well, and I think we're getting there.
Excellent. All right, Robin Lawson has one. John, go ahead. I don't want to cut anybody off. Jeremy?
I think Jody gave you the answer in her presentation. And when she talked about the fact that the conservation in the Y2Y region accelerated dramatically with the establishment of the Y2Y vision, that's it. Like, there has to be a really exciting and compelling vision. And how you structure that, yeah, that is an open question. It doesn't necessarily have to be an organization like Y2Y. It could be something else. But you need to get that brand and that image out so that you get people like Melanie galvanized to work extra hard, not just for her locality, but for this bigger view. But also you're getting support. You're getting people in who may not even be from the region. And there are some very unlikely supporters in the Y2Y region who are just compelled by that big idea on a global level that are in there. And that's, I think, the secret sauce.
All right, Robin, last question, and then we're going to conclude.
Not a question, but I did turn this on. Yeah. Okay. Not a question, but an invitation. If you all would like to continue talking about some of what we talked about today, I think John mentioned in his presentation, one of the outcomes of the workshop we hosted in June was to develop a community of practice for Canada around regional conservation partnerships. So we're going to have a fun little breakfast social time tomorrow morning on this floor in room A. You're welcome to grab breakfast in the dining hall and bring it with you, or eat first or eat after. That's 7 to 8 in Cette, CLA. Talk about regional partnerships.
All right, I will close with a final comment, which is in 1921, there was a guy named Benton Mackay who wrote a little paper in the American Landscape, I don't know, the Journal of the ALA, American Landscape Association, or Associated for American whatever, Architects. The Journal of the, yeah, that proposed an idea that everybody thought was totally crazy, called the Appalachian Trail. And Mackay had a compelling vision, and people followed it. And the Appalachian Trail set a precedent for trails, just foot trails, all over the world. Maybe we just need to do that again with roads. And Benton Mackay, if you can hear us now, we're still following the path you set out for us. So thank you all very much.